The night Kion thought he had finally won every battle, he realized the hardest fight of his life was about to begin. Because the bravest king in the Pride Lands was about to face something no roar could defeat, his own heart. The stars were bright over the savannah, the wind gentle, the kingdom safe. Yet something restless stirred inside him, a quiet loneliness he had never named. He had fought enemies, saved friends, carried the roar of the elders, but he had never learned how to open his heart to someone who could stand beside him forever. Since the day he became king, Kion walked the borders alone, thinking of duty, promises, and the future. He remembered his father Simba telling him that courage is not only fighting wars, but trusting others with your fears, too. At the time, Kion nodded like a proud cub, but tonight, those words felt heavier than the crown on his head. He wondered if a king could ever love without risking everything he protected. That same night, far beyond the baobab trees, a lioness watched the Pride Lands from a distant hill. She was strong, calm, fearless in battle, but gentle with the weak. Her name was Ronnie, leader of her own guard, protector of her people, a queen who never asks for praise. She had heard stories of Kion, the lion who carried hope in his roar, the king who forgave enemies, the cub who grew into legend. She had come not for power, not for glory, but because her heart whispered that destiny sometimes calls quietly. When Kion first saw Ronnie at the riverbank, he did not know why his voice softened. They spoke of simple things, the wind, the herds, the peace after storms. Yet something deeper moved between them, a quiet understanding. Ronnie saw the tide warrior behind the crown. Kion saw the brave soul behind her calm eyes. Neither said what they felt, but both knew the meeting was not an accident. Their youths turned into shed patrols. They walked through tall grass, climbed rocky hills, listened to the songs of birds at dawn. Ronnie spoke of balance and patience. Kion spoke of loyalty and courage. Sometimes they argued about mercy, about strength, about what it means to rule. But even their disagreements felt warm, because respect lived between them. The Lion Guard noticed first. Ibunga teased Kion endlessly, saying even fearless kings get nervous around brave queens. Fully smirked and said Kion finally met someone who could outrun his pride. Vesht laughed warmly, and Ono watched with wise eyes, seeing a story bigger than battles. But love is never simple for kings. Trouble came from the shadows. A rival clan attacked Ronnie's homeland, blaming her for seeking alliances with the Pride Lands. She returned to defend her people, refusing Kion's help, afraid that her love would drag his kingdom into war. Kion respected her strength but could not ignore his heart.
Quit.
He followed quietly, not as a king, but as a friend. In the fiercest battle, Ronnie fought alone against many enemies, protecting her pride. Kion arrived just in time, not roaring in rage but standing beside her in calm unity. Together they defended the weak, guided their allies, and turned the battle without cruelty. The enemy fled, not because they were crushed, but because they saw mercy stronger than hate. After the battle, Ronnie looked at Kion, with tears shining in her eyes. She said, "Why did you come?" Kion answered softly, "Because a brave king does not leave a brave queen alone." For the first time, Ronnie let her guard fall. She admitted she feared loving him because she thought it would weaken her. Kion shook his head and said, "Love is not weakness. It is the reason we fight." The stars witnessed their promise. No crown, no ceremony, just two lions choosing trust. They decided to walk together, not as rulers chasing glory, but as partners protecting life. The Lion Guards celebrated with joy because they knew their king had found not only love but balance. Yet the hardest part was still ahead. The Pride Lands whispered with questions. Some animals feared change. Others doubted if a queen from another land could belong. Ronnie faced suspicion with calm dignity. She helped, heal wounded antelopes, guided lost cubs, listened to elders. Slowly, hearts softened. The kingdom saw her kindness before her strength. One night, Kion confessed his deepest fear, that loving her might cost him the kingdom if enemies used her against him. Ronnie smiled gently and said, "A king who fears love loses himself. A king who trusts love finds allies everywhere." The birds healed, a wound Kion never spoke about. When the sun rose on the day of her welcome ceremony, Rafiki lifted his staff and laughed with joy. The animals cheered not for beauty or power, but for courage. Kion placed a flower crown on Ronnie's head, and she bowed beside him, equal, proud, fearless. That night, as they watched the stars, Kion whispered, "I fought many battles, but you taught me the bravest lesson." Ronnie asked softly, "What lesson?" Kion smiled and answered, that a king is strongest when he lets someone walk beside his heart. The wind carried their laughter across the Pride Lands. Love had not made Kion weaker. It made him wiser, calmer, kinder, and the kingdom slept peacefully, knowing their brave king had found a queen who understood his soul, and together they would protect hope for generations to come. 2. The morning the Pride Lands woke to whispers instead of songs, Kion understood that love does not end a king's battles, it begins new ones. Because protecting a kingdom is hard, but protecting love inside that kingdom is harder than any war. The sun rose red, birds flew in worried circles, and news came that distant clans doubted the new queen. Some feared change, some envied unity, and some wanted to test the strength of the lion who dared to rule with his heart. Kion walked beside Ronnie at the watering hole, hearing the murmurs of zebras and gazelles. He felt the weight of every eye watching her. Ronnie stood tall but quiet, never angry, never defensive. She greeted elders with respect, helped the young cross the river, and listened more than she spoke. Kion saw courage in her patience, a strength deeper than claws or roar. That evening, an envoy from a rival pride arrived with harsh words. They said the Pride Lands had grown soft, ruled by emotion instead of power. They warned that enemies would attack if a king cared more about love than fear. Kion's heart burned. Before he answered, Ronnie stepped forward calmly and said, "Strength without compassion destroys itself." The envoy laughed and challenged them to prove their unity in a trial of honor. The Lion Guard gathered as the sun set. Bunga said he would defend the queen with his life. Foley said, "Speed alone cannot solve a war of hearts. Best promised kindness can calm storms." Ona warned that truth must be seen clearly. Kion listened, knowing his friends were right. A king never stands alone. The trial began at dawn. It was not a fight of claws, but a test of leadership. They'd had to guide frightened herds through a narrow canyon during a storm. Rival lions tried to mislead animals, creating panic. Kion wanted to roar, to scare them into order, but Ronnie stopped him. She walked gently among the herd, calming mothers, guiding cubs, showing trust. Kion followed her example, speaking softly, guiding with patience. Slowly, chaos turned into harmony. Pride watched in silence as unity succeeded where fear failed. But danger did not end. That night, a fire started near the forest edge, sparked by enemies who wanted to see the Pride Lands burn. Flames rose high, smoke covered the stars, and panic spread. Kion's roar shook the sky, slugged clearing paths, while Ronnie led animals to water, saving lives. Together they worked without rest, proving that love does not distract a king, it gives him strength to protect more fiercely. After the fire died, the elders of the rival pride came quietly and bowed. They admitted they had expected weakness, but saw courage and wisdom instead. They asked how two rulers from different lands could trust each other so deeply. Kion answered that trust grows from truth, and Ronnie added that respect grows from listening. The elders returned home carrying a lesson greater than victory. Still, doubt remained in Kion's heart. One night, he confessed to Ronnie that he feared losing her if enemies kept coming. Ronnie touched his mane gently and said, "Love is not about holding tight. It is about standing brave together." She reminded him that even kings cannot control everything, but they can choose kindness, loyalty, and hope. Her words felt like rain on dry earth. Weeks passed, and the Pride Lands grew stronger. Animals who once feared Ronnie now trusted her wisdom. Cubs followed her stories, elders sought her advice, and warriors admired her courage. Kion watched with pride, realizing his queen had not only won hearts, she had changed his own understanding of leadership. One quiet night under bright stars, Kion asked Ronnie if she ever regretted leaving her homeland. She smiled softly and said, "A home is not a place, but the hearts you protect." She said she had found a family in the Pride Lands, not because of a crown, but because of trust. Kion felt tears. He did not hide. The next morning, Simba visited them and watched their kingdom. He saw peace after storms, laughter after trials, and unity stronger than pride. He told Kion that true kings are not remembered for battles. They win, but for hearts they heal. Kion bowed with gratitude, knowing his father's lesson had come true. As the seasons changed, enemies stopped coming. Nods, because they feared Kion's roar, but because they respected his purpose. Ronnie stood beside him, not behind him, and the Pride Lands shone brighter than before. Together they built paths for peace, taught cubs courage with kindness, and showed that love born in struggle becomes the strongest shield. One last night, as they watched the stars reflect in the river, Kion whispered that he once thought being king meant standing alone. Ronnie leaned beside him and said the bravest kings build a circle of trust around them. Kion smiled and looked at his kingdom, at his friends, at his queen, and he knew the truth. Love had not distracted his destiny. It had completed it, and their story would guide the Pride Lands long after their roars faded into legend. The night the stars seemed closer than ever, as if the sky itself leaned down to watch. Kion realized love was no longer a promise between two hearts. It had become a promise to an entire kingdom. And breaking it would break more than a crown. It would break hope. A storm rolled across the Pride Lands without warning. Wind bent the tall grass, thunder shook the hills, and fear crept into every den. Time messengers arrived from the borders saying a powerful coalition of rival prides was marching together. Not for land, not for food, but to test whether the king who ruled with love could survive a war built on hate. Kion stood silent, looking at the horizon. Beside him, Ronnie did not show fear. She asked only one question: will we fight alone or together? Kion knew the answer before he spoke. A true king never fights alone. The Lion Guard gathered in the rain. They had faced danger before, but this time the enemy's anger was deeper, louder, more desperate. Yet no one stepped back. Kion saw loyalty in every eye, and he felt stronger than any roar he had ever used. He told them this battle was not about winning, it was about protecting the future where love could still grow. When the rival prides arrived, they mocked Kion. They said love made him weak. They said a queen from another land would divide the Pride Lands. They said fear was the only power that lasts. Kion listened quietly, then spoke one truth. Fear rules quickly, but it dies alone. Love grows slowly, but it survives forever. The battle began at dawn. Dust rose like smoke, claws flashed. Roars echoed across the valley. Kion led the guard with courage, but he did not fight with anger. He protected the young, helped the wounded, and guided his team like a brother, not a ruler. Ronnie stood beside him, saving lives, calming panic, proving that kindness can exist even in chaos. At one moment, Kion was surrounded. Enemies closed in, laughing, certain they would defeat him. Sit. Then the guard leapt forward together, each risking everything, proving that unity is stronger than strength alone. The rival lions saw something they had never seen before. Warriors fighting not for pride, not for power, but for each other. The fight ended not with destruction, but with silence. The coalition leaders realized their claws could not defeat loyalty. They saw wounded enemies being helped, thirsty foes given water, frightened cubs protected without question. They understood they had come to destroy a kingdom, but instead they found a family. One of the rival leaders asked Kion why he showed mercy. Kion answered that mercy is not weakness, it is courage without hatred. Ronnie added that love does not erase strength, it guides it. The leaders bowed slowly, ashamed of their doubt. Peace returned, but Kion still felt the weight of responsibility. One night he walked alone, wondering if he deserved such loyalty. Simba found him and said, "A king is not chosen because he is perfect, but because he keeps learning." He told Kion that love is the hardest path, but also the brightest. Kion returned to Ronnie and thanked her for believing in him when he doubted himself. Ronnie smiled and said, "A queen does not follow a king. She walks beside him." She told him their story would guide cubs long after their battles were forgotten. Seasons passed, and the Pride Lands became a place where rival clans visited in peace, where young lions learned courage with kindness, and where the roar of a king meant safety, not fear.
Kion
And Ronnie ruled not with force, but with purpose. On the anniversary of their greatest battle, animals gathered under the stars. They told stories of unity, bravery, and love stronger than hate. Cubs listened with shining eyes. Elders nodded with pride. Kion looked around and saw not subjects, but family. He spoke softly, saying the greatest victory of a king is not defeating enemies, but turning enemies into friends. Ronnie finished his words, saying love that survives war becomes the light that guides the future. As the stars rose higher, Kion understood something he had never known before. Being brave is not about roaring louder than others. It is about protecting hope when darkness is loudest. It is about loving when fear says run. It is about standing together when the world says divide. He looked at his queen, his guard, his kingdom, and he knew their story was bigger than crowns and battles. A promise that courage with kindness can change the world. And as the Pride Lands slept peacefully beneath the moon, Kion whispered a vow he would keep forever, that no matter how many wars came, no matter how many doubts rose, love would remain their strongest roar, their truest crown, and the legacy that would guide the Pride Lands into every tomorrow.